because I volunteered. Thanks, Kate. All right, so it's 6:05. I'll call this finance meeting to order. Let it be noted that all committee members are attending. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Walston. Go ahead, Kevin. You'll have to repeat what you said before.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Ginelli. Good evening, everyone. And thanks again for joining this evening, the Finance Committee meeting. As I had said previously, I was hoping to get a chance to speak to you this evening and really follow up on a conversation I was starting at the board meeting, at our last board meeting, when just kind of talking about the challenges that we've realized in these first couple of months of school, the challenges, although some of them anticipated, but the social emotional challenges and frankly, the academic gaps that we've experienced are far greater than we had anticipated. As part of our planning, and I had talked about kind of a reallocation of funds and revisiting some of the commitments we made. And one of those commitments, at least the first stage of this in my eyes anyway, is revisiting some of the commitments we made in our alliance planning. So every year, annually, there is typically an increase in funding of Alliance. You might recall there have been discussions previously about trying to get the state to escalate the allocation to Danbury, particularly given our growth over the years and significant increase in ESL and ELO students. That aside, however, we do continue to get an increase every year, as most Alliance districts do. We had some commitments as part of our plan and annual submission of the grant. I had shared with our advisor, who's kind of like the advisor for Danbury Public Schools. I had shared with her that we are likely to revisit this commitment because we're really not sure what the needs are going to be in Danbury. It may need some time to reassess. And I think now, given that we're almost here at Thanksgiving, I think we have a clearer picture on what those needs are. And so some of those needs include support for schools to address social emotional support that are needed at various buildings. Some of those needs are intervention supports at many of our schools. And some of those needs also include administrative support, given we probably hired close to 100. I think Ken, the last time we spoke, was 85 to 90 additional certified staff than we've hired in typical years. So typical years, we'll have 100 new staff members, not additional, but just 100 different staff members annually. We're up to 185 so far this year. And I think that just speaks to, number one, our growth, some of the commitments we've made to address the social distancing goals that we had talked about as part of the ESSA 3 funding. And I think it calls upon us to kind of revisit some of the structures and support systems we have in place for staff, and then just addressing the various needs at some of our schools. So I'm saying all of that to say, this year, we received about close to $2.6 million increase in Alliance funding. And I'll ask John for some specifics on that. We parked over 1.8 million for positions to support the district in terms of classroom teachers. We are looking now to revisit that number, the 1.8 million, and instead use that for school climate support a combination of climate specialists, school climate specialists, and this is to address behavior challenges that might exist in some of our schools, lower level behavior challenges that might exist in some of our schools, to support our elementary principals with some of this behavior and help get kids back in classroom after they can address those needs. This includes student support specialists to provide intervention support in our elementary buildings. And this also can include paraprofessional support to also provide tutoring support in various K-5 buildings. Last but not least, what I'm going to share with you this evening is a recommendation also, and just want to also demonstrate that we have the monies to support this, assistant principals across 3 or 4 of our largest elementary schools, 2 of which are close to 600, and the other 2 are close to 500 in terms of enrollment. The needs, and I think we have talked about some of these challenges before, just in terms of enrollment numbers and just general staffing. But given the escalated needs and social emotional demands on the teachers and the building principals, I think there's even more of a need to find a way to support these programs and supports and buildings now. So I've asked John to just kind of walk us through, again, some of it, he's just going to reiterate what I said, and then others, just kind of maybe more clarification. We can both just kind of talk to any questions that you might have. But it's really just assuring the board that, you know, the money is there, and that's with the Alliance funding. This is reoccurring funds. I think we need to revisit the ESSER spending and get more creative with different ways to support schools. But this is something, these are consistent reoccurring funds that we have coming to the district that I think we can begin to bake into our budget and our allocation. Sorry, John.
So first, the Alliance grant in total, as Kevin mentioned, very big increase this year. Last year, it was $14,840,000. This year, $17,418,000. So we went up $2,575,000. And what we're talking about is using some, not all, but 1.8 million of the 2.5. And the 1.8 would be divided into 3 component parts. And as Kevin mentioned, the 4 largest schools would get $140,000 each. That comes up to $560,000. The other 10 schools would get $64,000 each. So there's another $640,000. So between those 2, there's 1.2 million. Then the final 600,000 would be for the 4 assistant principals. We'd budget a figure of 150,000, not that they would get paid that much. That would include expected health insurance expense. So the 3 parts are the 560 for the 4 biggest schools, 640,000 for the rest, and then 600,000 for 4 APs, coming to 1.8 million.
And is that from the ESSER money that you're talking about?
No, that's the increased Alliance grant.
Alliance grant, okay.
Yeah, way up.
Thank you, okay.
And so Kathy, for clarification, the cliff that, and this is why we need to get more creative with ESSER, because that does yield, the ESSER 3 does yield in 3 years. ESSER 2 yields in 2 years, and CARES, I think we have 1 more year in that one. But the Alliance is an annual allocation provided for all Alliance districts. So I just want to provide that clarification on that one.
Yeah. I've got a question though, just for clarity. I don't have it in front of me, but I recall the summary we did of the braided funding last year. We had each of the, I'm going to call it categories, and spelled out generally what they were going to use for, and the bucket or the category of the Alliance money was going to be used for specific things. Is this a redeployment of what was presented to us last May or June?
Give me 1 second. I have it on my computer, Mr. Chair. 1 second.
You're making it sound as if we found, $2.8 million, $2.8 million, which is not the case. This was all part of the braided funding we did last year to hit our $13 million number. And then each of these funding sources had categories that they were going to be applied to.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So in that braided document that you're referring to, was just a little bit off. Courtney had 17,350,000. And I think John just reported 17,420,000 of that, or a number thereabouts. And then in the document, in fact, I can present it. Give me 1 second. And so Mr. Janelli referring to the braided funding. When we presented last year, just for those of you that don't recall, so this was the city allocation. This was Alliance allocation with a potential increase of 2.1. I'm sorry, this is the carry forward, John, right? That was not inclusive of the bump. And so here's the 14 million, Mr. J, here from last year. And you'll see in here, the planning is actually not articulated in this document, with the exception of a couple of positions that we had parked here. And so we're not, I mean, we have to annually apply for the grant. We have to submit a plan to the grant every, to the state annually, which was presented late summer and approved. And so in that plan, we had submitted not knowing how we wanted to spend the $1.8 million. We had parked in there potentially additional teachers across the system, knowing that we would continue to experience growth across the system, et cetera. However, I did reach out to, again, the person who supervises, is in control of Danbury, and asked for permission to have an opportunity to revisit our submission at the halfway point in the school year, because we knew we were going to need some time to just kind of assess where we were as a district. Not only me being new in the district, but also just understanding where we were coming back to school full time after the pandemic. So to answer your question, these are the two commitments that we made publicly, and that's the literacy coach and the support for summer school. That's $120,000, and this was against the $14 million. And then here's $200,000 for social justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion training modules. And I think those are the only commitments that we had in Alliance that we talked about publicly. And that's this line here. The other ones were to be submitted in the grant, but.
Excuse me, Kevin,
Yes,
just correct me, please. We're reallocating these funds for assistant principals. Were they taken away from, let's say, guidance counselors or additional teachers?
no.
It makes it sound like we've right. I agree with Rich. Like there's braided funding, like we've got an additional funding, and so now we're putting it into management staff rather than additional teachers, because I know we needed guidance counselors also. Correct?
Yeah. So there's a lot of things going on, and so you'll see counselors that were added to the system. Social workers that were added to the system. We've hired close to 80, 90 staff members in this district this year, between high school staff, elementary staff. We had, remember, just, and you'll see some of it here in ESSER 3, right? For example, so here's a coach, two coaches here, additional ESL staff, 300,000 here, additional teacher for Broadview for bilingual services here, and then additional teachers here, right? And so this is close to almost like 700,000. I believe that number is, yeah, almost 800,000 right here in staff. And you'll see the numbers here, 6, 11, 12, 13, 14 teachers. This is just for ESL bilingual. There's no shortage of staff that we have added to the system over the last couple of months. I mean, over the last couple of months since this summer. The family liaisons, I know we've talked about in great deal. I believe we have 8 in the system so far, and that's some of those positions are reflected here. The other ones we paid for in title. Let's just see if I can find the ones for growth, because we had 15 at the high school and then 16 at elementary, and you might recall. And so those 31 teachers were just to achieve our social distancing challenges. We've added 5 or 6 at the high school alone, just since the beginning of the school year, because we've received about 200 200 students new to the system since the school year started. And so I am always going to be an advocate for making sure we have more teachers in classrooms. The reality is, however, is that we have brought in more teachers for classrooms. And so right now what I'm trying to do is get additional teaching support, student support specialists at our schools, which is what John was talking about. Those are even more teachers in the system who would push in and provide intervention. The paraprofessionals provide even another layer of intervention for students. These will be bilingual paraprofessionals where we can get them. However, with these additional layers of teachers also requires administrative support across the system, observations and evaluations. But with a needier student population also requires additional support for staff because they need to, when they pick up the phone, they need someone who's going to be there to answer. And so, you know, we have all of our elementary schools who have grown in staff, our high school who has grown in staff, middle schools who have grown in staff. Admin has stayed stagnant throughout this process. And all of the staff right now is needier and needs support.
Okay, I think you've answered my question the administrative staff is Alliance Fund, which will continually be funded by the state of Connecticut. The ESSER money was put for the extra teachers, which is, let's say, one time or after 3 years, this ESSER money is gone. So, okay. So in 3 years, we'll have to reallocate additional funds to pay for the teachers, but the administrators will continually be funded basically through our Alliance allotment, correct?
Yeah, and so I think it's important that I do speak to the additional positions that we've added through ESSER. And so certainly we're not in a position to do that next year, but certainly year 3, in year 4, meaning next year and the year after, 22, 23, 23, 24, 24, 25. The expectation also is the needs will not be the same in the system, right? We're not expecting to continue to be in post-pandemic mode in terms of staffing for the remainder of. And so the idea is through attrition, we begin to start to fold those positions that we've hired through ESSER, and we fold those positions into the general budget as staff begins to retire, right? And so if we've hired 15 additional teachers last year, and so maybe next year we don't do attrition replace, but certainly 23, 24 through attrition, we hired 30 plus elementary teachers every year, right? In a non-pandemic year. And so we start folding those positions into operating budget. Instead of us finding a new teacher, we pull from the teachers we hired with ESSER funding and slide them into operation. So our expectation is, of course, this is assuming we don't experience considerable growth. As an example, South Street Elementary School for the last couple of years has had 3 sections in every grade level. AIS Elementary School has had about 3 sections at every grade level. If we maintain those numbers, when AIS, they lose staff because of retirement, we would pull one of these ESSER teachers who's funded through ESSER and slide them over to AIS. The same thing at South Street. Again, this is assuming that we don't experience growth at those levels. So that's part of the plan in that regard, to address those questions about the financial cliff, because we know they're real. And this is why we have John and Eddie to help us with this plan.
Well done, sir. Attrition,
Thank you.
I get it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Russo. Thank you.
So Kevin, do me a favor, scroll down a little bit to the bottom. I see the 200,000, staying on the Alliance. There should be a total on the bottom or something.
I'll get, you want me to grab these numbers? You want me to sum up those numbers?
Right. No, I could add them in my head. I mean, that's okay. I was just
So I'll
trying to
grab it
see
for you. Right, and so at least in this braided document, we had 320K planned against the 17 million, if you want to call it.
I don't recall. Okay. All right. So essentially what you're saying is you're, from what was, what's bothering me here is from memory, I thought we had put in the use of these monies in certain categories to total down to the totals on the bottom. But again,
Right,
it's
and
going
I'm sorry, Mr. J, I mean to cut you.
but the point of what you're saying is that now we have a redeployment of the alliance money in terms of more specific uses than what was generally outlined a number of months ago. As things progress to more realistic situation currently, you're redeploying the alliance increase as opposed to a conceptual issue you had back in May when you were putting this together and you didn't know what the impact was of this COVID on all these other issues. Is that correct?
Yes, and thank you for saying it that way. So we, John, I think we submitted the grant maybe September 1st, or it was definitely at the beginning of the school year.
Very well after the budget was first envisioned.
Right. And the increase, that $2.5 million increase that John and I were talking about, the board has not, at least in my short time here, has not seen the detail in terms of that submission to the state, right? And what we're sharing this evening is we knew we would get an increase because we have annually from Alliance every year. We planned for that $2.5 million budget, in which about $600,000-$700,000 for salaries with contractual obligations. Many of those $700,000 had to go to contractual obligations, maybe not all of it. I don't know the exact number, but we landed on about 1.8 to park for staffing. We just didn't have the specifics on what the staffing would be, and asked the state for a couple of months to figure that out. So in the meantime, we had submitted teaching support because we knew we were going to do it. We're modifying that submission to reflect the intervention support that we talked about, plus the 4 assistant principals.
Okay. All right. So it's just the increase, because I know 100%, at least my thought process is 100% of the kindergarten salaries are all funded through Alliance. So the 600,000 that you apply to would have to be for the increase in contractual obligations, at least for those, for the K through 5 or the kindergarten course. But okay, I was just surprised. Again, it bothers me that the details. I don't know how. I tell you the truth, I don't know how to let it slip by, because I'm a nut to like to see these totals foot. So some reason it slipped by me, but all right. So long as we have the understanding that you're redefining and reallocating the increase in Alliance money in accordance with your current needs and demands are.
Yes.
Oh, all right.
And so, and last but not least, because I understand there may be questions about all of it, so I'll share everything with the committee. The second part is, I just want to walk the committee through positions that have been budgeted in a district, and in terms of how I am seeing the needs, along with feedback from my cabinet, how I'm seeing the needs for district office. I want to remind the committee of some of the positions we had budgeted prior to this school year. And so during the 2021 school year, in the spring of 2021, prior to Courtney leaving us, we had a presentation for the budget, and we had talked about pulling facilities and operations out of the finance department. And basically, I think Sal's point was the district has grown, the district is too large for facilities and operations to live in the finance department. And so at that time, we had budgeted in the spring for a chief operations officer, in addition to and at this point, Courtney had already resigned. And so we had budgeted for a chief operations officer and a chief finance officer, right? And so those were we were basically budgeting for pulling out facilities in operation, and chief operations officer was budgeted prior to this school year started. So I just want to start there, right? And so that's one position. And then of course, with me being elevated to the superintendent's office, that left my office open and vacant. I also want to remind the committee, my first year, which was 2018-19, when I started, there were a number of new positions added to the district. It was supervisor of ESL K-5, that's Tammy Swift. There was a position of curriculum administrator, K-5, that was Dr. Anna Rocco. And then of course, there was a director of curriculum instruction, and that was Dr. Kara Casimiro. And so those are three new positions that were added to the curriculum resource center. Anna Rocco's position was budgeted out of Title I, and Tammy Swift and Kara's position was budgeted out of operating fund. You might also recall that the principal at King Street Primary was moved to a central office position, was then paid out of Alliance. I don't know if you knew that level of detail, but he was paid out of Alliance. He's our SRBI coordinator. This left and remained budgeted Anna Rocco's former position of curriculum administrator. This is my long way of saying we currently have budgeted a curriculum administrator position in Title I, paid out of Title I. My position, my old position, still budgeted assistant superintendent office, and a chief operating officer position that Sal recommended before leaving, and we had budgeted for. With those three budgeted positions, one budgeted out of title, that was Anna Rocco's old position. One budgeted out of operating funds, that was my old position. And one budgeted prior to the start of the 21-22 school year, that was a chief operating officer position. I will look to use those three budgeted positions to help outfit district office moving forward. And I'll have some details for you on Wednesday night.
And the staffing chart, right? Because
Yeah, when you say
that was
staffing
a little
chart, what do you
hard
mean?
to follow, Kevin.
Oh, absolutely. I'll have the detail. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Pictures, graphs, and well, not pictures and graphs. Well, it will be pictures
Trees,
and graphs.
I don't care. Houses, I don't
Absolutely.
care. But,
Absolutely.
definitely, we need who reports to who.
Absolutely.
And Kevin, I thank you for your this new level of transparency, sir, that we were not used to under the previous administration.
Well, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Says you, Mr. Russo.
Okay, is there
Does
anything
not.
further?
I'd rather be ignorant than, or not ignorant than not knowing.
Can
I can retain some of it, Kathy.
May I ask a quick question, Rich?
Yes, Kate, please.
Mr. Walston, can you remind me, I know we had this conversation at one point, and I certainly hear Mr. Russo's concern about making sure we're keeping our teaching staff numbers up, but there was a recommendation at one point, I feel, for, and I can't remember, what the capped number was or what the recommended number was for the point at which you institute an assistant principal at a school.
So there were different numbers recommended. I believe the number we had used was 450 when making those presentations in the spring last year.
Okay, that's what I was wondering about. Thank you.
And I'll take a look back at the PowerPoints, because I think Courtney and I, when we were making those presentations, we included that number in the PowerPoint. So I'll take a look while we're talking. that's okay.
And Kevin, it's my understanding, we just completed salary negotiations with for assistant principal and the upper level administrators.
Yes.
But your numbers today, do they reflect those increases that you're using last year's numbers, salaries, or are we going to need some additional funding?
Yes, that's a good question. So the actual numbers is a number we will have to negotiate with the union. Interestingly enough, at the elementary level, we have one assistant principal, but she was actually placed. She was formerly a principal, and she was placed as an elementary principal. And so we actually have to negotiate the assistant principal salary with DSAA. That's my long way of saying we actually don't have a negotiated number for assistant principal with the unit. So even though we have one position, that person was placed in that position, we actually have to negotiate the salary with the unit and agree on a number.
Thank you.
Okay.
And Kevin, for the record, historically, we've never had a detailed budget comparable to the operations budget for the makeup of the Alliance money.
No.
The funding in that account had always been lump sum funding, and then with conversations relative to positions, as a general statement, when it first came to us, it was all kindergarten went in there, and then as we went along, it was used for other things. So there was never really any breakout. And I repeat myself now, this is something that my suggestion would be in the future is that you have a budget comparable to the operating budget. I don't care if you do it in line numbers or however you do it. So it makes things comparable. And that's why I think we were taken back, because we never got into the level of detail in the Alliance as to what went where and things like that. So if you just put that on your note and to at least make things comparable so that, we're more informed as to what the budgets are and what you're looking to spend it against. And my suggestion would be for each of those buckets, do the same thing so that we know that of the X number of dollars in these budgets, in these buckets or funding sources, another way of putting it, is that there's a definitive concept as to what the money is going to be used for.
Totally agree. And John, Ed, and I, it's something that we've been working on, the poor guys, since they've been here. And so our goal is to make sure we can present out on our bigger grants the same way we present out on our general budget. And I think that's what you're getting at, Mr. J. So we can all have a conversation.
Yeah, the reporting on the grants have been historically poor. I mean, absolutely poor. We've had no reporting on the grants, and when you talk about the grants, it's talked about lump sum numbers of some 35, forgetting the CARES money, but some 35 thereabouts $1 million, of which 14 or 17 is made up of Alliance and Title I and all that stuff, but nothing more specific than that. And these numbers are growing, and there should be more accountability at this point here and clarity as to what we're spending money on.
Yes, that is definitely our intention, and totally agree with you.
It's a constructive criticism. That's all it's meant to be. But okay. Anything else, Kevin?
That's it from me. I don't know if John or Ed had anything else to add.
No.
Okay.
Great job.
So I will make sure I reiterate these things on Wednesday evening, but more importantly, have the visuals and the presentations just kind of support what we're talking about tonight.
Okay, good. Any other committee members have any questions before we adjourn?
I have just a quick question, Rich. And
Sure,
this is
Kate.
kind of unrelated, but I was contacted by someone who was asking, there was a grant that was won for AIS for, from the Connecticut Office of the Arts. And it was intended for what they call higher order thinking activities. I guess, because the schools were closed last year, that this grant was not used. And I'm just wondering if it's still available for use this year.
Kate, if it is, I have to look it up. And so it's easier for me to see grants that are in what we call our e-grant system. The higher order grant is not one of those. So I'll have to ask tomorrow and see where we are with the high grant and see where we landed just in terms of its expiration and was that carried over because of the pandemic? I'm not sure.
It's a smaller grant, so I
Yes, it
really
is.
appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you.
definitely is. Yeah.
If I may
They
be
all
allowed.
count. They all count though. We like all of the grants coming in. Sorry, Mr. Russo.
Oh, no, I apologize, sir. It's the Zoom. If I can just go off script for a moment, where are we as far as getting an assistant superintendent to take some of the load off your shoulders, sir?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And so part of the presentation for reorganization on Wednesday, I will share out our thinking, my thinking on how to restructure us. And just a little snapshot of the thinking is turn my office, my old office, into specific support for K-5 and 612. And we've had a consultant now prior to my arrival as an assistant superintendent who said that the district should have 2 directors, a K-5 and 612. And then we had the most recent consultant, which I'll be sending to your attention this evening, say that we should have his recommendation is actually assistant superintendent of elementary and secondary. But the overriding recommendation is making sure that you have support for these 2 levels. And so that's my long way of saying, Mr. Russo, I'm going to recommend on Wednesday support that looks a little bit different than how my office previously supported schools. One at a K-5 level, one at a 612 level, and I'll have some more detail for the board on Wednesday evening, just to make sure that you show up on Wednesday. So I'll make sure I have that detail for you. But it's really connected to the challenges that and this was long before the pandemic. Jonathan Costa from Ed Advance recommended directors K-5 and 612. This person, our most recent consultant, he actually recommended assistant superintendent K-5 and 612. I'm not going to recommend that, a little different, but I am going to recommend support for those 2 different levels and turn my office into a little different position.
I'll wait till Wednesday night.
Thank you, sir. I don't want to get in trouble with the full board telling the committee everything for Wednesday.
Okay, but this is your, it's great, and I like your future vision. That's your job and responsibility. I'm going to ask on Wednesday if you would also, in addition to the verbiage, as Kathy had mentioned, just have some sort of an organizational chart so we can follow who's on first. And,
Okay.
and again, a visual is always good with your new positions to see who reports to them, etc. All right.
I appreciate it, Mr. J. Thank you.
Good. Okay. With that, if nobody else has any questions, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Okay. So this committee meeting has been adjourned. I thank everybody for their attendance, and we'll see you all on Wednesday.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.